You're on mute, Haiti.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for some technical difficulties. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Federal Fiscal Year 2021 Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plans Public Workshop. My name is Haiti Yonamine with the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation, and I will be facilitating today's workshop. This workshop is being webcast publicly at video.calepa.ca.gov. We are also recording today's workshop, and we will post the recording on the State Water Board's website for anyone who may not have been able to join us today. This workshop is for informational purposes, and no formal action will be taken. The Water Board's mission is to preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources for the benefit of present and future generations, which is why we want to begin this workshop by acknowledging the groups who have and who continue to experience economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization and whose daily lives are impacted by racism and injustices. As a reminder, our work here today should strengthen the empowerment of Indigenous and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, affordable water to all Californians. We have about 39 people participating with us on the Zoom platform and by phone. We'll start things off with some meeting logistics. I'm going to direct you to a few Zoom features we will be using today. You should have a taskbar at the bottom of your screen. Here you will find your mute, unmute button, camera on and off button, a button to open the chat feature, a reactions icon to raise your hand, and a button to open the participants box. So let's start with the participants box. Please click on the participants button. This will open a participants panel that shows you the names of all the people who are in the workshop today. The participants panel will also help us locate when you have your hand raised. All right, now, and those who are on the phone, sit tight, I will provide more information for you as well. All right, now let's raise our hands. So what we're gonna do is go to the reactions button and go ahead and click on the raised hand, and this is what you will use during the question and answers section if you have any questions or comment during that time. And then for folks calling in, please enter *9 on your keypad, and this would be a great way. Okay, great. I do see some raised hands. Awesome. All right. Now, now that you know how to raise your hand, let's now try the chat box. Click on the chat button and a window should open. In that window, please type your answer to the following question. How many cups of coffee have you had today? Okay, I see folks there's some coffee drinkers, some tea drinkers, that's great. And maybe some of us haven't had any coffee. Maybe water will do us. Yes, water works. Thank you, Cecilia. Okay, great. So I see that you're all familiar with the chat box. So thank you for providing and sharing your answer. Finally, if our presentation is too big for the screen, please set your view option to exit full screen. Typically, a taskbar is found at the top of your screen, but it can also be found at the bottom of your Zoom window. For folks watching the live video stream at video.calepa.ca.gov, please note that there is usually a 30 to 60-second lag between the Zoom workshop and the webcast. To improve streaming quality, folks participating on the Zoom platform will have their cameras turned off and microphones muted during the presentation portions. There will be an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments after the presentation. Questions will be taken in the order they were received. When it's your turn, your name will be announced and you will be asked to unmute yourself. For those watching the live webcast, you can email your question or comment with the subject as 2021-22 IUP workshop to drinkingwaterSRF@waterboards.ca.gov for Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or Clean Water SRF@waterboards.ca.gov for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Again, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the State Water Board's website. We want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us today. We're doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way, and that this time is valuable for you. I'd like to review some guidelines. We ask that you mute yourself when you're not speaking. This is a 3-hour workshop and we have a scheduled break, but please take breaks as you need them. In case you get disconnected, please rejoin the Zoom workshop or watch the live webcast. And finally, if you need technical assistance, please email drinkingwater.srf@waterboards.ca.gov. If you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand or type it into the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And if you're calling in and need technical assistance, please raise your hand by entering *9. We have staff from the Division of Financial Assistance presenting today who will be introduced in a moment. We also have staff working with scenes to working behind the scenes to make sure that we have as few participation bumps as possible, and we would like to thank them for supporting this process. Now, I'd like to introduce Christopher Stevens. Christopher Stevens is the Loan and Grant Deputy Director in the State Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance and oversees both the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and Clean Water State Revolving Fund programs. Christopher? Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Haiti, for that introduction. Just to clarify, I'm the Assistant Deputy Director. Haven't been promoted there. So as Haiti said, Assistant Deputy Director here in Division of Financial Assistance. So on behalf of our Deputy Director, Leslie Loudon, and the State Water Board, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. I know your time is valuable, and so I just have a few comments, introductory comments that before we get the show started here. Staff has 2 very exciting presentations for you today. We look forward to all of your questions. And just to second what Haiti said, I really want to thank all the staff. You'll see a number of staff presenting today and answering questions. There's a number of staff behind the scenes that are making all this possible. And in particular, I'd like to thank Haiti and the other staff from the Office of Public Participation for really helping us put this all together. So the Clean Water IUP was posted last week, I believe late Thursday or perhaps Friday. The Drinking Water SRF IUP is not posted. I'm hopeful that that will be posted today or perhaps tomorrow. We know there's a lot of information in those IUPs, and certainly each of them will be available for public comment for the full 30 days. Really, the purpose of the workshop is to help you in your review of that. I realize, perhaps some folks have had a chance to glance at the Clean Water IUP at this point. There really aren't any major changes in the IUP this year from last year. So if you're familiar with the IUPs, they will look very familiar to you. But nonetheless, our workshop today is really to try to help you focus on those things that are most important to you as a potential user of the SRF programs as an applicant. But nonetheless, because they haven't been posted for all that long, we're going to do a second workshop. That is going to be scheduled for Friday, May 14th. I encourage all of you to attend both of them if you have the time. We will go over the exact same information that we do today, but again, another opportunity for you to ask questions of the staff, make sure that you understand what the IUPs are all about. The second thing that I want to talk briefly about is, of course, many of you keep track of the news. You may have heard of the American Rescue Plan that was approved by the president in early March. This year, there's with the new Congress, there's also been quite a bit of talk about SRF reauthorization of the SRF programs, both of them. With some corresponding substantial increases in funding from Congress for that, for those programs. Also quite a bit of buzz about potential additional stimulus and a second stimulus bill. Of course, those things are speculative at this point, but what has been approved at this point is the American Rescue Plan. Part of that, I think, was a total of $1.9 trillion. 190 billion of that was for state COVID recovery. Now, there were 4 things that the states can do with those funds. 3 of them are not really relevant to us today. One of them is, though, and that is, it said the states could use that for necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So that certainly, lines up with the SRF programs. Excuse me. Now, I would like to be able to say that I know exactly what is going to happen with those funds, but I don't. You're all familiar with the state budgeting process. The governor will release a revised budget in May, middle of May. I don't know the exact date. We are, providing information to the Department of Finance, but at this point, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with those funds, whether some of them will wind up in the SRF, one or both of the SRFs, whether some of them will come to the water boards and be used in conjunction with the SRFs. I just don't know for any certainty at this point. Now, for those of you that were around in 2009, you may recall ARRA, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Both SRF programs received some pretty substantial increases in federal funding from that act. And I went back and refreshed my memory. We went to the board 3 times as part of the rollout of those funds. So hopefully over the next weeks or so, or maybe a couple of months, it will become clear what's going to happen with these American Rescue Plan funds. And we will either amend the IUP or go to the board with a separate resolution, make recommendations about how to roll those funds out. So I just wanted to get that out there at the beginning. At this point, we've written the IEPs based on the assumption that we won't get any of those funds. We wrote them based on what we know. And so at this point, they're written without that penciled in there. We did make some reference to incorporating funds if they come to us later on, but we didn't put specific numbers in there as far as any additional funding from that act. So with that, I want to pass it over to Mike Downey, who is one of our supervising engineers here in the Division of Financial Assistance, and I'm going to turn it over to him so he can kick off the show here. Again, thank you everybody for coming. Really appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Christopher. My name is Mike Downey. I'm a supervising engineer in Division of Financial Assistance. And I was going to go quickly over our agenda today and then introduce our speakers for the Drinking Water SRF portion. So we will be starting with the Drinking Water SRF IUP presentation. And then hopefully around 10:20, we'll be opening up for questions and answers. We will take a break, as Haiti mentioned. And so we'll start back up at 11 o'clock for the Clean Water SRF portion of the workshop. Again, we'll end with Clean Water SRF IUP question and answer period. And our plan is to adjourn by 12:30, give you still some time to eat lunch. So the staff presenting today for the Drinking Water SRF will be Win Trin Lee. She's a senior engineer with many years working with drinking water SRF program. And Bridget Chase, she's a supervising engineer with the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. The office is focused on helping fund our small and or disadvantaged communities with their drinking water needs. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Win.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the workshop. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Yun Chun Lei. I am the Senior Engineer, Chief of the Drinking Water SRF Technical Unit. My presentation today will cover some key elements of the Drinking Water SRF IUP and highlight some of the news that we have for this year. So here is a preview of the topics that I will talk about for drinking water today, some background and IUP basics. Then I will briefly discuss the financial outlook, developments of the comprehensive list and the fundable list. As usual, I'll go over what remained the same as last year and point out some of the changes for this year. I will also go over the SWRCB, including the program status and funding approach. For small DACs, small DACs and small severe DAC, as well as the remaining items, Ms. Chase from the Office of Sustainable Water Solution will cover, and after that, we will open for comments and questions. As you may already know, the Drinking Water SRF were established in 1996 by the Safe Drinking Water Act Amendment to provide low-interest loans and some principal forgiveness to public water systems for drinking water improvement. And Congress would appropriate funds to US EPA, and US EPA would allocate funds to states based on the needs of each state. The state needs are documented in the Drinking Water Infrastructure Needs and Assessment that is conducted every 4 years. The survey assessment is currently ongoing this year after a 2-year delay. So instead of having a 2019 survey, we are having a 2021 survey right now. And we have been contacting many systems selected for the survey to gather documentation to help us complete the questionnaires. For this year's survey, EPA is also looking for information on lab service lines and water operator workforce, in addition to infrastructure needs. And many of you have been tremendously helpful to the state in this effort over the years, and we are looking for another successful round of survey as well. And thank you in advance. Thank you for all that have responded to our request and provide very valuable information to help the state capture all of the needs for drinking water system over the next 20 years. As you all know, the needs are much greater than what we can receive from the federal grants, and recognizing that California has provided several other funding to complement the drinking water SRF. These complementary funding sources generally follow the drinking water SRF policy and IUP to make things easier for for applicants to come to the program. There's information or requirement that we want to make sure the project will meet to get the funding. In July 2019, Senate Bill 200 established the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. This fund is one tool in the state's water board's larger Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience, or well known as the SWRCB Drinking Water Program. It will be used in conjunction with the Drinking Water SRF to complement the State Water Board existing suite of financial assistance programs. And so for the project that come into the State Water Board for funding, the program focus on 3 priorities, and therefore projects are prioritized accordingly to address the most serious public health risk problems, to ensure compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act requirements, and to assist those most in need on a per household affordability basis. So I believe many of you are familiar with the Drinking Water SRF and the basic elements that of the IUP. I'm going to touch on that very quickly, and we expecting, hoping that the Drinking Water SRF IUP will be posted shortly, and hopefully you will have time to view it and attend the second workshop, as Christopher has mentioned, on May 14. If you have a question, anything you'd like to discuss on that. We apologize for not having it out soon enough before the workshop. So here the link location where it will be. You can also access that through the board comment page, which will have a link to get to the division, the SF page here for the IUP when it is posted. The State Water Board will submit this IUP as part of its application for the federal fiscal year 2021 capitalization grant to US EPA. And the IUP contains elements required under federal law. One of the requirements is to establish the State Water Board's business plan for the Drinking Water SRF and its associated state funding programs. And the annual business plan includes discussion on finances, staffing, resources, and goals, approach, and requirements. And we will highlight some of those today. So who are considered eligible applicants for the programs? Entity eligibility has remained the same, and they include publicly owned community water systems, any privately owned community water system, and any nonprofit, non-community water system, provided that they can meet all other drinking water SF requirements. And however, eligibility may depend on the applicant type and the funding source that would be used to fund for the project. And what kind of activities are covered. So eligible costs include planning documents, project design, construction and construction management, administration, and costs for preparing environmental documents. So the IUP discusses the financial outlook for the program in rather detail that you will have a chance to see once it's posted. Basically, DFA analyzed the funding data and projection and determined that the sustainable funding capacity for the drinking water SF is approximately 330 million in loans per year. In addition, there will be approximately 151 million in principal forgiveness available for the federal fiscal year 2021. This includes the principal forgiveness portion from the 2021 CAP grant and remaining principal forgiveness from prior years. The additional supplemental appropriation for Disaster Relief Act 2019, or known as SWRCB funds available currently is 46 million. And I will provide more detail on this funds later. Furthermore, the complementary funds available will be around 155 million from a combination of Proposition 1 and Proposition 68. The safe and affordable drinking water funds is also one of the complementary funds, and detail will be in the expenditure plans posted on DFA website. So here are some of the recent drinking water SRF activity. As of March 1st of this year, there were 24 agreements executed by the drinking water SRF and complementary funds for a total of 167 million. Additionally, 33 agreements are in progress at various stages towards execution of agreement for another 173 million. And we anticipate that many of these will be executed by June 30th of this year. All right, so this slide gives you a summary of the application that we received as of February 2021. The comprehensive list has a total of 345 applications for almost 3.4 billion in requested funding. Of these, 270 applications are from small DAC or small SDAC, and other systems with problems rank in categories A to C, or for consolidation projects for 637 million total from this group. There are also 21 project rollover from last year IUP for about 1.3 billion. Several of these may receive a funding agreement by the end of June of this year. There are also 54 projects for 1.4 billion that will review and rank for placement on the fundable list. So we keep hearing about the fundable list. So what is it and how a project gets to be on that? The fundable list is the list of projects that DFA identifies as most ready for financing by June 30th of 2022. There are really two sub-lists as shown in the diagram here. All small DAC, SDAC, expanded small DAC or SDAC, and small non-DAC with projects in categories A to C are automatically on the list, provided that they submit complete application. Ms. Chase will cover this section in detail in the second portion of the presentation. And for other repairable loan projects, they are prioritized by their problems and readiness to proceed. Here is a summary of the project that requested repairable loans that we put on the fundable list for this IUP for this year. The repairable project currently, we have 35 projects with an estimated requested loan financing of 1.56 billion. And you can see here almost all of the requested funding is for larger water system construction projects, 30 of them in total for 1.52 billion. I apologize, my clock just really working as a clock. It's chiming every 15 minutes. So for the grant portion, for these repairable projects, there are also about 33.75 million in grants. These are grant funding for specific project and for the SWRCB project. And this amount is separate from the complementary funds that's shown in the previous slide here. Just to want to kind of point that out for you. And now, what's the same for this year? We have the match financing available. If you are interested in local match financing, please contact us. The application process remains the same, and applications are being accepted continuously via the financing application accepting tool here via FAST. This online financing application acceptance submittal tool has been the main vehicle for application coming to the program. You can select multiple funding program that's available there. DFA will assist and review as applications are submitted. It's important to repeat that projects on the fundable list is not a guarantee of funding, and project must meet all eligibility criteria for funding at the time of funding execution. Again, all of the small DAC and small SDAC projects are automatically added to the fundable list, and we provide retroactive planning and design eligibility remain the same. Past project planning and design costs remain eligible, and of course, on costs must still be documented for reimbursement. So what else are the same here? DFA offer extended planning financing term. It is either 5 or 10 years term at the applicant request. And expanded construction financing term for a DAC or SDAC system will be 40 years or project's useful life. For all others, it will be 30 years or project's useful life, whichever is shorter. The loan repayment is now is annual, and with the first principal and interest repayment due 12 months after project completion for non-DAC system and 18 months for DAC or SDAC system. And we have the prepayment that will require DFA Deputy Director approval. All right, what else would remain the same? The major change that we made last year was to streamline the final budget approval process. And this seemed to be helpful to allow recipients access to draw construction funds sooner. And project budgets will be finalized from the outset in the agreement and eliminate the mandatory amendment step that's associated with the final budget approval, or better known as FBA. Agreement may still be amended for cost increase for other reasons. For small disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities, the funding criteria remain relatively the same as in last IUP and will be covered in the second portion of the presentation. All right, with all things that remain pretty much the same as last year, what new do we have for this year? So what may be significant or of interest is that the designation of non-equivalency environmental review has been expanded to include planning projects, expanded small DAC and SDAC construction projects, certain non-transient water system projects serving DAC, SDAC, and also small non-DAC construction projects that are in categories A to C. We also extend that to all of the ASADRA projects. And so next, I will go into more detail on the additional supplemental appropriation for the Disaster Relief Act of 2019. So as you know, the ASADRA became law on June 6, 2019 to provide additional funding for water and wastewater infrastructure affected by specific natural disaster. For California, it is mainly for wildfires and earthquakes in 2018 calendar year. And the state's water board is submitting a revised supplemental IUP to apply for additional reallotment that become available. The amount of reallotment is about $4,253,000, and this will bring the total funds available under ASADRA to $46,339,000. The supplemental IUP for ASADRA is on Appendix H of the Drinking Water SF IUP, which will be posted shortly. For ASADRA eligible projects, information for more detailed information, please refer to the October 23rd, 2019 from US EPA, located at the link shown here. ASADRA funds are available to help public water system affected by wildfires in calendar year 2018, and all of the existing requirements for drinking water program are applicable, except where they are different, as we just point out in previous slide. And there is also a memorandum of understanding between FEMA and US EPA that the ASADRA funding will not affect FEMA eligibility. For projects eligible for funding, DFA offers 30% principal forgiveness up to $3 million, and a loan at 0% interest to fully fund the entire project. Repayment is similar to SRF for 30 years for a non-DAC and 40 years for DAC, or the useful life of the project, whichever is shorter. So for the fundable list, for projects that get on the fundable list for ASADRA, currently we have applications from 7 agencies as shown in Appendix H for a total requested cost of $60 million. Funding requested that over ASADRA funds, available funds will be provided by Drinking Water SRF, or for eligible entity by complementary funds to fully fund the project. The project was prioritized based on complete applications as of January 31st of 2021, and funding priority will be based on if the project start construction by December 31st of 2021, it get priorities if it serve a small DAC, a small SDAC, or a project was ranked based on health-based ranking per the SF policy. ASADRA project, as I mentioned earlier, are designated as non-equivalency per DFA memo dated September 30th of 2020. And this would mean that CEQA only environmental review will be applied and applied to the entire project. So for now, to provide an overview of small disadvantaged communities, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Bridget Chase. Bridget.
Thank you, Wynn. Again, my name is Bridget Chase. I'm a supervising engineer from the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. Because my slides are going to go over some information about small disadvantaged communities, I would like to first start off with some of the helpful definitions that we have included in the intended use plan. So for drinking water projects, a small community is considered a community with 10,000 or less people or 3,300 connections or less. We further define an expanded small community as a community between 10 and 20,000 people or 3,300 and 6,600 connections. A community is considered disadvantaged if their median household income or MHI is less than 80% of the statewide MHI. And then a community with an MHI less than 60% of the statewide MHI is considered a severely disadvantaged community, or SDAC. Small DAC applications are included in the comprehensive list, but not included in the fundable list in the IUP, as Wynn mentioned previously. This is because small DACs are automatically added to our fundable list no matter when their application is submitted. Applications for small DACs, expanded small DACs, and small non-disadvantaged communities with category A3C projects. And I know that's kind of wordy, but pretty much the projects that are grant eligible that are listed in the Appendix E of the IUP are covered in this section here. Those are automatically added to the fundable list. Grant and/or principal forgiveness funding may be available for small DACs, expanded small DACs, and category A through C projects for non-DACs. Small and expanded small DACs may also be eligible for reduced interest rates for loan funding if they need loan funding. Priority will be given to projects that address the most serious human health risks or category A through C projects and consolidation projects. The category A through C projects generally include projects that address compliance violations or water shortage issues, but details can be found on the funding categories, specifically in the drinking water SRF policy if you want more details. We also offer technical assistance to small water systems to help with such things as application assistance, public outreach, rate studies, and sometimes even the planning necessary to apply for construction funding. As Wynn mentioned in slide number 19, the draft intended use plan includes CEQA-only review for small DACs, expanded small DACs, and small non-DACs with category A through C projects. So again, those projects identified in Appendix E. And this should, requiring the CEQA-only review for these projects should help speed up our application processing time for these projects. So that's something we're really excited about. Small DACs that still need to complete the necessary planning to move forward with a selected construction project, such as a feasibility report and environmental documents, can apply for planning funding. We no longer have included a cap for planning grants, but rather there's a maximum amount of grant or principal forgiveness per community in a given 5-year period. This includes any planning, technical assistance, and construction that the community receives through the Drinking Water SRF program. Details about the planning grant and principal forgiveness available can be found in Appendix D of the draft IUP. The feasibility report required for construction funding requires applicants to evaluate consolidation of the subsequent system with nearby water systems. If consolidation is deemed infeasible, the applicant must discuss the reasons for that determination. If consolidation is determined to be the most feasible alternative, then grant or principal forgiveness funding will only be available for the consolidation project. The next 2 slides include grant eligibility for construction projects. This information can be found in Appendix E of the IUP. As I mentioned a couple slides back, we are prioritizing projects that address the most serious human health risks or category A through C projects. So that is identified in these tables, and you'll see that there's higher grant percentages and higher caps for them as well. These higher priority projects may receive up to $60,000 per service connection for grant. This table shows the percentage of project costs that may be eligible for grant or principal forgiveness based on the type of community the project will serve. As you can see, small DACs, small SDACs, and eligible non-transient non-communities such as public schools may receive up to 100% grant for their project. Expanded small DACs and small non-disadvantaged water systems with category A through C projects, so again, those higher priority projects, may receive up to 75% grant or principal forgiveness. This slide shows grant eligibility for category D through F projects with priority given to consolidation projects. These projects are eligible for up to $45,000 per connection. Small DACs are eligible for a higher grant percentage than expanded small water systems, and severely disadvantaged communities are eligible for a higher grant percentage than DACs. For most of these systems, we will also be looking at the residential water rates as a percentage of the community's MHI to determine if the system is grant eligible. Small non-DACs are not eligible for grant or principal forgiveness for category D through F projects. The funding caps and eligible grant percentages are proposed to remain the same as last year's IUP. Grant and principal forgiveness funding caps are per residential service connection and apply to the total amount of grant or principal forgiveness funding that a community could receive from all funding through the Drinking Water SRF program. So that includes planning, technical assistance, and construction funding in a 5-year period. Because our focus and priority is on the projects that address the more serious health risks, we have included a higher cap per connection for category A through C projects. We also realize that projects for smaller systems that have fewer than 45 connections have a difficult time meeting these funding caps. Therefore, this draft IUP also allows for up to $2 million in grant or principal forgiveness, regardless of the per connection limits. As of last year, small non-DACs and category A through C projects, small non-DACs with category A through C projects may also receive funding for their projects. In addition, groundwater grant program funding may be available to public water systems serving DACs and SDACs for projects that prevent and clean up contamination of groundwater that serves or has served as a source of drinking water. These funds will be administered consistent with appendices D and E, except that groundwater grant program funds may be available to projects benefiting DACs with water rates of at least 1.5% of their MHI, regardless of the number of service connections or the population served. So it could be for larger disadvantaged communities. These grants may be awarded in addition to grants or principal forgiveness awarded through the Drinking Water SRF. We plan to continue to incentivize consolidation projects and are proposing to expand on the incentives available this year. An incentive project is a project that will solely benefit the receiving water system and can include infrastructure improvements, operation and maintenance support, or potential refinancing of existing loans. This incentive funding is in addition to any subsidized funding that the consolidation project may be eligible for. The draft IUP discusses how a system can apply for and receive the incentive funding. Ideally, the receiving water system should submit at least a partial application for their incentive project prior to execution of a funding agreement for construction of the consolidation project. The application for the incentive project then should be completed within a year after funding that consolidation project. The draft IUP identifies 3 different ways that an applicant can qualify for an incentive project. So this is something new this year. When the first one is not new, but the second 2 are. When a full physical consolidation is complete, the receiving water system may receive up to $10 million in 0% financing. In addition, if the receiving water system consolidates a small DAC, they may receive up to $5,000 per connection in grant or principal forgiveness towards an incentive project. Or if they consolidate a small, severely disadvantaged community, they may receive up to $10,000 per connection, with a maximum of $5 million grant or principal forgiveness available. So as I mentioned, this year we have added consolidation incentive for public water systems that managerially consolidate a system or provide an interconnection. The available incentive funding isn't as high as a full physical consolidation, but the receiving water system could receive up to $2 million in 0% financing for their incentive project. In addition, if the managerial consolidation or intertie is for a small DAC or SDAC, they may receive up to $2,500 per connection or $5,000 per connection, respectively. The maximum grant for managerial consolidation or interconnection is capped at $1 million. The State Water Board may also appoint an administrator to a public water system to provide administrative, technical, operational, legal, or managerial services, or any combination of those services, as well as full management and control of all aspects of the designated water system. If an administrator is appointed, the administrators may receive up to $5 million in 0% financing for an incentive project, or they may receive up to $2,500 per connection if they are an administrator for a small DAC, $5,000 per connection if they are an administrator for a small, severely disadvantaged community. The maximum incentive grant an administrator may receive is $1 million. The Drinking Water SRF IUP was should be posted for public comment today. My notes said that it was, but I don't believe it has been yet. The deadline to submit written comment is noon on June 1st. You're attending workshop number 1, and we will be having a second workshop with the same information on Friday, May 14th. DFA plans to take the Drinking Water SRF IUP to the June 15th board meeting for consideration of adoption. DFA plans to execute funding agreements for projects listed on the fundable list within a year, so by June 30th of 2022. If you would like to submit public comments on the draft Drinking Water SRF IUP, details can be found on the Notice of Opportunity to Comment document. Written comments are due by noon on June 1st, 2021, and we encourage you to use the subject line of comment letter dash June 1st or June 9th or June 15th, 2021 board meeting Drinking Water SRF IUP, so that your comments are somehow not missed. Most of us are currently working from home on a regular basis, so we encourage you to submit via email if you can, but you could also submit comments by mailing them to the address found on this slide. If you would like to verbally express your comments, you could also do so at the June 15th board meeting. This is my last slide, and so I'm going to pass it back over to Haiti. Thank you so much for your time. And I will be available for comments or questions.
Thank you, Bridget. And also thank you, Yuan, for your presentations. Now we will transition to taking questions and comments for both Zoom participants and from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund email. As a reminder to folks participating on Zoom, please raise your hand or use the chat feature if you have a question or comment. You can raise your hand through the reactions icon or use the chat feature by scrolling to the taskbar at the bottom of the screen. From there, you can type in your question or comment. For those who have called in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And once I introduce you, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. When I call your name, please provide your first and last name, who you're representing today, and please do your best to keep question or comment to 3 minutes. For folks watching the live webcast, you can email your question or comment to drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov with the subject as 2021-22 IUP workshop. In terms of procedure, I will start with raised hands, then we'll look at the chat box. Question or comment will be taken in the order they were received. When it's your turn, I will introduce you and you'll receive a request to unmute yourself. We kindly ask you to be mindful of the limited time we have here today and keep your questions and comments succinct. After Zoom participants, we will take questions, comments from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund email. In the event we are unable to take all the questions from folks, you can also email us at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov, and staff will respond to those questions after the workshop. I'd like to introduce Mike, Ewan, and Bridget, who will be responding to questions. So now let's start with the raised hands. So if you have any question or comment, please feel free to raise your hand through the reactions icon. And folks, again, for those who are watching us through the live webcast, you can email us at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. Okay. I see Mike Downey. I see that you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Haiti. I just wanted to apologize again and say thanks for your patience. The draft IUP should be posted today, as Bridget and Wynn mentioned. And then we will be posting a recording of this workshop on our website. And we will also be posting the slides that you've seen today. So anyone that's wondering if they can get a copy of that, we will be posting that shortly.
Great, thank you, Mike. All right, so we have SoCal A. Rocha. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I am trying to figure out how to figure out the minimum household income. I'm just kind of curious if that's changed and how to go about doing that.
Thank you for your question. And with one of our presenters, Mike, Bridget, or Ewan, respond to the question.
Yeah, so this is Bridget. I'll go ahead and respond. So we haven't really changed our process for that. The way that we determine if a community is disadvantaged, which I'm assuming is why you want to know your MHI, is we look at the most recent community survey data through the census website. And we use that data as of April 1st. So now we're using we just recently updated our data for that. So if you want, you could definitely reach out to us at the State Water Board to check and see what the MHI is for your system. And we could look based on the service area for your system.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, do we have any other raised hands? I can come back to the raised hands. In the meantime, I will move to the chat box. So we have, let's see. So I see, will copies of the slide presentation be available from Ray Gutierrez? Mike, would you have an answer for that?
Copies of the slide presentation will be available. So I'll be posting a PDF copy of the presentation and the recording of the workshop on the website, on both Drinking Water and Clean Water SRF website.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Ray. Next, we have another question. Abigail Hernandez, where can I find the application and/or instructions on how to get on the funding list?
And Christopher Stevens was nice enough to share the link in the chat to our application. For those of you that are not on the Zoom call, if you go to waterboards.ca.gov and navigate to the financial assistance pages, both the Clean Water SRF and Drinking Water SRF web pages, I think are pretty clear on how to get the application. I know it's not always, so you can always reach out to us if you're having trouble finding it. and we can send you the direct link.
Great, thank you, Mike. We do have a raised hand. Malcolm Hamilton, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, just a couple questions on the MHI, median household income. I often get asked. That's relative to like the whole service area of a water system, as opposed to maybe a project that takes place in like a tract where the median household income maybe is less than 80%. Can you maybe help just clarify that?
Yeah, so typically what we do is, sorry, this is Bridget again. Typically what we do is we look at who the project's going to serve. So if the project itself is for the entire system, then we'll look at the system as a whole to determine that. If it, for example, it's going to tie in some new homes or a particular community, then we'll look at that specific community's MHI.
That's really helpful. And then can I ask another, if you don't mind?
Sure, go ahead.
With the ASADRA funds, I'm sorry, you may have covered this, but you don't anticipate additional appropriations to the ASADRA group, because it appears that it's fully kind of booked, the 46 million.
That's correct. This is Mike Downey. So it was kind of a one-time appropriation for disasters that occurred in 2018, and it's not impossible that Congress could do another appropriation in the future for another event, but that was specific to 2018, and we do have applications that are on the fundable list, a SWRCB fundable list, requesting all of those funds. And so we're working towards those, but if you want to be on the wait list, feel free to contact us. But yes, at this point, we do have enough applications in to allocate the funds we have available.
Thank you, Mike. And Malcolm, thank you for your questions. Let's see if there are any other raised hands. Okay, so we will now move to the drinking water state revolving fund email, since we don't have any raised hands at the moment or any other comments or questions in the chat box. So we have an email from Carrie Swain from Coachella Valley Water District. And Carrie is asking if you could please email the presentation. And Mike, I believe you provided information on that.
Yep, and we can email you directly since you sent that email in.
Great, thank you. And we have another email from Shoshana Aguilar from the city of Carlsbad. Where would I find the posted IUP for fiscal year 21-22?
You'll find it hopefully later today on our website, but not sure how you found out about this workshop today, but if you're on some of our LIRIS email lists that we send out, we will send out a notification that it is posted. So if you subscribe to the Drinking Water SRF email list, Clean Water SRF email list, you should get a notice about that in your email with a link to where you can find it. And so it'll be on our program page, and it'll also be when you go to the State Water Board's webpage under public notices and public comment. It has a list of all the documents that are out for public comment, and there's a link there as well. So hopefully with one of those 3 or 4 methods, it'll be obvious to you later today. Fingers crossed.
Great, thank you, Mike. And thank you, Shoshana, for your question. So I know that folks watching the webcast, there is a 30 to 60 second lag between the Zoom workshop and the webcast. So we'll go ahead and give you some time to submit your question or comment via email at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. So in the meantime, we'll come back to the emails. And so I do see that Abigail Hernandez has, you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Abigail.
Thank you. So I think you might have already said this, but so I was just wondering, where can we find the MHI for, so I'm calling from City of 29 Palms, so I was just trying to find the MHI for this area. Hello?
Thank you, Abigail, for your question. Can one of our presenters respond to Abigail?
Yes, Abigail, this is Bridget. If you want to just reach out to our general drinking water SRF at waterboards.ca.gov email address, we could definitely get you what the most recent MHI is for your system.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the website? Is it the drinking water SRF at Waterboard?
Let me just confirm that real quick. Anybody?
Yes, it's the address that's shown on the slide currently.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Drinking water SRF at waterboards.ca.gov. So that's our general email address. And if you reach out to that email address then and just say that you want to determine what the MHI is for your system, what we'll do is we'll probably request a copy of the service area for your system so that we make sure that whatever data we have matches up closely with what the service area is.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Bridget, and thank you, Abigail, for your question. We do have a question in the chat box from Kristen. What deems an application complete? And what is the typical processing time for an application once deemed complete?
Thanks, Kristen. I'll take the first stab, and if anyone else wants to chime in, you may. So an application being complete is submittal of all 4 application packages. And this is true for drinking water and clean water SRF programs. And so the packages are the general package, technical package, environmental, and financial. So we deem it complete once all of those packages and attachments are submitted to us. The time frame can vary quite a bit. So what we will do, just a little insight into our program, what we will typically do is start on the environmental review first, because that can often have the longest lead time, as we are sometimes consulting with federal agencies as part of the federal funding process associated with drinking water SRF. You may have heard today that we do have a CEQA only review, alternative environmental review, for those projects which we have determined are equivalency projects. And I won't bore you at the moment with the details of what that means, just that we will not do a federal consultation for generally some of our smaller projects and disadvantaged communities to try to speed up that. That being said, the goal is to have an executed agreement for projects on the fundable list by the end of the fiscal year. So those projects, those larger agencies that we're showing on the fundable list, our goal is to have an executed agreement by June 30, 2022. Bridget mentioned that if you're a small disadvantaged community, then you are automatically added to the fundable list as soon as your application is complete. We're always hesitant to give some hard numbers on what that means for turnaround. Our experience is that every project is definitely unique and has its unique challenges. But we would hope that 6 to 9 months after a complete application, you could have an executed agreement. I think the reviews can be done within that time frame, but it does take time to route it around for everyone to sign it. And on that note, we are making some progress towards more electronic procedures. So COVID-19 has helped to move us in that direction, but we're not quite perfect there yet. We are still working hard to include more electronic procedures, signatures, etc. But for the moment, there's still a lot of wet signatures too with it.
Thank you, Mike, and Kristen, thank you for your question. I see Sergio Carranza. I know that you've had your raised hand, so go ahead and unmute yourself, Sergio.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is definitely great information. My question is specifically regarding the actual process. We are very familiar with the application process, which include the the general, the technical, environmental, financial. That's definitely we're very familiar. We work really well with project managers on this issue, on the process and everything. But my question is more specific about what can we do that I don't see here to expedite the process of this application? Because I can assure you, we have been working on projects using that either the Clean Water SRF and the Drinking Water SRF for over 4 years. And which I mean, again, I think we need to improve and we need to find better solutions to expedite that due to the emergency. All the projects that we do are emergency projects. They need top priority urgency. A lot of people is facing water contamination with arsenic and fluoride. So, but I don't see any discussion. Perhaps this is not the right forum, but I don't see any discussion from the water board to say, guess what? We are now revamping and streamlining the process that will reduce for a typical 1.5 or 2 years. Now we are actually shrinking this process to be 6 months, just to give an example. So I would like to hear what is the State Water Board is doing to really review and analyze the existing protocols to expedite this process so we can deploy those financial resources to those communities in need.
Sergio, thank you so much for your question, and it's a great question, and one of our presenters will take that.
Well, let me jump in here, Haiti. I'm going to field that question, and so I can't speak to any individual projects that you might be thinking about. You mentioned 4 years there. I can't speak to that necessarily, but that is an almost constant topic here in the Division of Financial Assistance. And I don't want to come across as making excuses. That's not the right response to your question. It is very much uppermost in our mind about how to make this process work quicker and more smoothly. And bear in mind that there are a lot of different programs that we run here. If you go and look at our website, there are a long list of programs, and trying to run all those programs with the resources that we have is our biggest challenge. Any individual project, I can take any individual project, and if you gave me a complete application, if that was the only project that I was working on, we could probably get an agreement in a couple of months. But we have in a typical year, we probably fund on the order of 175 to 200 projects with a combination of Clean Water SRF, Drinking Water SRF, state bond funds from Proposition 1, Proposition 68, Prop 13. Again, I don't want to make excuses to that question. It's a perfectly legitimate question, and as I say, it's uppermost in our mind. If you observe what we do in DFA over any period of time, you will see that we are always making changes to make the process go smoother. One of the things that was highlighted earlier was the non-equivalency projects. That's definitely one thing that we're doing, but there's a lot of other things I can't rattle them all off the top of my head, but that is definitely uppermost in our mind, is to try to make this process go smoother and quicker. One thing we are working, which is indirectly related to the drinking water program and those needs is the Clean Water SRF is working with the Environmental Finance Center over at Sac State. There are a couple of professors over there that are coming in. We're working with them to do an overall management review of how the division is organized, how our procedures are set up, all of those sorts of questions. And as I say, all these programs are run in conjunction with each other. They're not really separate programs. They don't have, if you were to look at the way we're organized, you would see that administrative staff works on all these programs. Legal staff works on all these programs. And so really the biggest challenge we have is how to organize all of those reviews and do them all in an efficient and timely way. That's our biggest challenge there.
Thank you, Christopher. I just wanted to add a little bit more to that as well. One thing that we would encourage, I know often we get partial applications, and I would definitely encourage you to get a complete application as soon as possible, because sometimes what happens is if you start an application and then you wait too long to submit something, then some of the other application documents might become stale and then we need an update. As well as if you change anything in the scope of the project, that might require updates as well. So just be aware of that.
Let me just add two real quick to that. One additional thought, which was part of your question, was what can you do on your end to make the process go more smoothly? And I would sort of echo what Bridget is saying there. I would highly recommend that you, if you're an applicant, stay in very close contact with your project manager. If you need any information from them, don't hesitate to contact them. If they're asking for some information from you, best to respond as quickly as you can to that. That's going to be the most beneficial thing that you can do individually.
Thank you, Christopher and Bridget. And Sergio, thank you for your question and your comment. We do have time for one more question, and I see that Melka Hamilton, you included your questions in the chat box. What is the current interest rate on loans? Do you have an official outlook on rates for the next year or two?
This is Mike Downey. So the interest rate for the Drinking Water SRF program for 2021 is 1.2%. And the nice thing about Drinking Water SRF is that that is the interest rate that will be for the entire year. And so that's pretty certain. We don't necessarily have an outlook looking ahead, but I can share in the chat here. We have our interest rate history that we've seen over the last decade. And so if that's any indication, you can take a look at that. What happens is we offer the interest rate at half of the state of California's GO bond sale. And so for the Clean Water SRF, it's kind of instantaneous, so that rate changes throughout the year. For the Drinking Water SRF, it ends up being an average of the GO bond sales over the year. So what we can do is see what bond sales happen this year, and then we'll start to get an idea of what that average will end up being to be established for 2022. But at this point, interest rate 1.2%, and don't have a guess as to what it would be next year yet.
And this is Ann Hartridge from the Office of Chief Counsel, just adding a little bit of info to what Mike said. So the Drinking Water SRF interest rate, as Mike said, is set over the course of a year. It's set once. So we will find out on January 2nd what, or shortly thereafter, what it will be for a given year.
Great, thank you, Anne, and thank you, Mike. We want to thank you also, Malcolm, for your question. So I want to go ahead and thank everyone for asking your question and submitting your comments. I know we have a limited amount of time today, so if we were unable to get to you please email us at drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. And I want again want to thank everyone for your attention this morning. And we have a 10-minute break scheduled in a moment, but before then, let's hear from you. We have a quick poll that will help us know how we did today. We appreciate your participation and want to assure you that all responses to the poll questions will be anonymous. So with that, Beth will launch our first poll question. Here's the first poll question. How clear and easy was the information presented today? Very clear and easy to follow, clear and easy to follow, somewhat clear and easy to follow, not clear or easy to follow, or no opinion or comment. Great. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. We'll wait a couple seconds more so you can vote. Okay, now we'll move on to poll question number 2. So poll question number 2, how satisfied were you with the ability to ask questions or provide comments? Very satisfied, satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not satisfied, no opinion or comment. Great, thank you. And now we will move on to poll number 3. Beth, if you can launch poll number 3.
I see it.
Okay,
In
I
progress.
don't see it on my end. If you can go ahead, Mike.
Sure. It's how satisfied were you with the responses to the questions or comments? Again, very satisfied, satisfied, somewhat, not, or no opinion. Thank you. Looks like we're getting the good attendance here, participation. And the last question is for future workshops. I would prefer to participate via Zoom, in person, both, or no opinion. Terrific, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mike. For some reason, I wasn't seeing it on my end, and thank you for that. So thank you, Beth, for launching the poll questions, and thank you all for participating in our poll questions, and we appreciate your feedback. With that, we'll now take a 10-minute break, and when we return, we will discuss the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. It is now 10:54, so we will be back at 11:04. Thank you. All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's 11:04, so I hope you enjoyed your quick break. You had a chance to stretch out your legs or have a glass of water or maybe another coffee. So for those that are now joining us, we just concluded the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. And now we'll be discussing the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Intended Use Plan. I'm Haiti Anamina with the Office of Public Participation, and I'll be the facilitator for today's workshop. As a reminder, this workshop is being held virtually through Zoom, and it's being webcast publicly at video.calepa.gov. We are also recording today's workshop and will be posted on the State Water Board's website for anyone who may not have been able to join us today. This workshop is for informational purposes and no formal action will be taken. To improve streaming quality, folks participating on the Zoom platform will have their microphones muted and cameras turned off during the presentation. There will be an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments after the presentation. At that time, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand through the reactions icon on the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. If you're calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your keypad. Questions will be taken in the order they were received. Folks watching the live webcast, you can email your question or comment with the subject as 2021-22 IUP workshop to cleanwater@waterboards.ca.gov for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. If our presentation is too big for your screen, please set your view option to exit full screen. Typically, a taskbar is found at the top of your screen, but it can also be found at the bottom of your Zoom window. Again, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted on the State Water Board's website. We want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us today. We are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable for you. I'd like to review some guidelines. We ask that you mute yourself when you're not speaking. We just took a break and we are halfway through this workshop. We will not be taking a break for the remainder of the workshop, but please take breaks as you need them. In case you get disconnected, please rejoin the Zoom workshop or watch the live webcast at video.calepa.ca.gov. And finally, if you need technical assistance, please email cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. You can also raise your hand or type it into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen if you need any technical assistance. And if you're calling in, you can enter *9 on your keypad. We have staff from the Division of Financial Assistance presenting today who will be introduced in a moment. Now, I'd like to introduce Christopher Stevens. Christopher Stevens is the Loan and Grant Assistant Deputy Director in the State Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance and oversees both the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and Clean Water State Revolving Fund programs. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haiti, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know your time is valuable, so just make a few introductory comments here before I turn it over to staff for the presentation. As Haiti indicated, I'm Christopher Stevens, one of the Assistant Deputy Directors here in the Division of Financial Assistance. So on behalf of our Deputy Director, Leslie Loudon, and the State Water Board, I'd like to thank you for coming to our presentation today. Staff has a very exciting presentation for you today, and we look forward to your questions. And so let me echo what Haiti said. Thank you to all the staff. You'll see a number of them being presenters today. There's a number of folks behind the scenes that are making this all possible. And I do want to thank Haiti and the folks from the Office of Public Participation for helping us put all this together. So I apologize to those of you that were here earlier, but for those that may not have been here earlier, just a couple of things I wanted to highlight. The Clean Water SRF IUP has been posted. That was posted, I believe, either late Thursday or Friday of last week. Of course, we know that there's a lot of information in the IUP. It's quite a lengthy document, quite detailed. I would say that there's not huge changes from the IUP in past last year. And so if you're somewhat familiar with the IUP, it should look very familiar to you. Nonetheless, it is a lot of information to digest, and hopefully you've had a chance to at least glance at it. But nonetheless, we are going to put on a second workshop. We're going to repeat this workshop, do the same presentations, offer an opportunity for people to ask us questions. We're going to schedule that for May 14th. And so staff will send out additional information about how to participate in that second workshop as well. So I encourage you, to listen today. Really, the purpose of the workshop is to try to help you in your review, help you focus on those things that are most important as a stakeholder or as a potential applicant to the program. But like I say, nonetheless, we will have a second workshop in a couple of weeks to go over this all again. The second thing I wanted to talk about briefly is, of course, many of you keep abreast of the news, and so you may have heard of the American Rescue Plan. That was approved by the president in early March. As I recall, $1.9 trillion was the total. Of that, there was about $190 billion for state COVID relief. And of course, with the new Congress, there's also been a fair amount of talk about reauthorization of the SRF programs, Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF, with some pretty substantial increases in funding there. Also talk of an infrastructure stimulus bill. Those are kind of speculative, but the one that has been passed at this point and that is relevant today is, like I say, the American Rescue Plan. That $190 billion, there were 4 authorized uses for those funds. 3 of them are not really relevant to us today. One of them, though, is, and one of those uses was for necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Now, I wish I could tell you today that I know exactly whether the Water Board will get any of those funds, whether it'll go into the SRF, whether it might be given to us to manage outside of the SRF. I just don't know at this point. You're all familiar, I hope, with the budget process. The governor will release a revised budget, what they call the May revise, in the middle of May. And we're providing information to the Department of Finance, but at this point, I can't say exactly what's going to happen with those funds. At this point, we have written the IUPs, both the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF, assuming that we won't get any of those funds, because that's all we know at this point for certain. That may change, but excuse me. If you're around in 2009, when they had the ARRA funds, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds, both the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF did get substantial additional funds from EPA for both of those programs. And I went, the Water Board was managing the Clean Water SRF at that time. Drinking Water SRF was still at CDPH, but for the Clean Water SRF, we did go to the board 3 times as part of the rollout of those ARRA funds back in 2009. So I am anticipating that over the coming weeks, maybe the next couple of months, as we get a clearer idea of whether we will get any of these American Rescue Plan funds, and what the additional requirements might be on those, that then we'll be in a position to either amend the IUP or to go to the board and make some recommendations for how we would roll that out. So I guess stay tuned, and a reminder, if you're not on the LYRIS distribution list for the SRF programs, I would encourage you to do that. That's one way. We also post information on our website, but that's the LYRIS email distribution list is certainly one of the main ways that we get information out timely regarding the SRF programs. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Mike Downey, one of our supervising engineers here in DFA, and he is going to kick off the workshop and introduce the presenters for you today. And again, thank you everybody for coming. Really appreciate your time. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Christopher. My name is Mike Downey. I'm a supervising engineer in Division of Financial Assistance. And my section, as Christopher mentioned, manages the Clean Water SRF program, Drinking Water SRF program, and the Water Recycling program, which is closely administered with the Clean Water SRF. So I'm just going to take some time real quick to go over our agenda and then introduce our presenters for the Clean Water SRF portion. So we are here at the 11 o'clock-ish hour. We're going to start the presentation. We're going to hopefully around 12 o'clock wrap up the presentation, move into our Q&A session, and our plan is to adjourn by 12:30. So we will be covering the Clean Water SRF IUP in this portion. If you're just tuning in and you missed the Drinking Water SRF portion, don't worry, we will be posting both the slides and a recorded version of this workshop on our website. And as Christopher mentioned, we will be having a second workshop as well. So our two presenters today will be Bob Pontareri, a senior engineer in the Division of Financial Assistance overseeing the Clean Water SRF program, and Bridget Chase, who's a supervising engineer with the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, and the office focuses on our small and/or disadvantaged communities and finding funding solutions for them. So with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, Mike. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I am Bob Pontareri. I'm a senior engineer with the Clean Water SRF program. This slide is a preview of our presentation today. I'll present the first three sections covering the background, the program updates, and application demand. I will then hand it off to Bridget Chase, who will take over for the small disadvantaged community section. I'll return to finish up the remaining sections covering the financial outlook, fundable list development, and the schedule and the submitting of comments. So let's get started. Program background: the Clean Water SRF was established in 1987. The SRF offers low interest loans funds and limited principal forgiveness funds, also called non-repayable financing. We offer other state funding is also available, and it's usually available via the legislature or voter-approved propositions. This funding provides complementary grant and loan funding that can be combined with Clean Water SRF. The program is guided by the Clean Water SRF policy, which was last amended in December of 2019. The program is very popular, and we currently have a demand that is greater than $7 billion. The basics of the IUP. So the IUP is available at the link shown here. I believe it was posted on Thursday last week, and it's also going to be available on the DFA website. The IUP is required to be submitted to US EPA annually and is included as part of our application to US EPA for our capitalization grant. Think of our IUP as our business plan. It discusses our financing, staffing, resources, goals, approach, and lays out specific eligibility requirements to receive financing from both the SRF and the complementary sources. Eligible applicants and costs. Typical applicants are listed here and includes a wide variety of public agencies, nonprofits, and tribes. Applicants can also include some private entities. Anyone with questions should contact our office for more details concerning specific applicant eligibilities. Typical costs include planning, design, construction, construction management, and administration, and change order contingencies. Eligibility may differ depending on our complementary funding source and is ultimately dependent upon source requirements. Eligible projects. Eligible projects funding is available for publicly owned treatment works projects, or POTWs, for both wastewater and stormwater. Eligible projects also include projects that address non-point source, estuary plans, recycled water distribution, and treatment. There are many others, so please contact us if you want more details on specifics. So you might ask, what's new? So all the application forms are updated and currently available. We have an executive summary is provided in the IUP to increase readability and is offered as a quick reference to major changes. In addition, electronic submittals of reimbursements, requests for disbursements are now accepted. There is currently a 50-page size limitation, but hopefully we expect to expand that to 200 pages in the near future. More details on this will follow. What has stayed the same? Application submittals. FAST is the preferred submittal method, but US Postal and FedEx are also acceptable as well. Application acceptance is a continuous process. Deadline to submit documents for scoring purposes is December 31st each year. The deadline is really tied to the priority scoring of projects. All documents for scoring purposes should be submitted to ensure the highest possible score by the deadline. Construction cost eligibility can begin at the issuance of a notice to proceed, as long as the environmental review for the project has been completed by our staff. We also continue to offer short-term financing incentive to projects seeking a 20-year financing term or less, and you'll get an interest rate reduction of 0.25%. Application demand. Overall application demand is very high in the Clean Water SRF program. There are 52 rollover projects from previous fundable lists, 114 disadvantaged community projects totaling $459 million. 43 projects were scored this year for fundable list consideration, and they totaled about $2 billion. We have about 26 projects that are subject to suspension or removal due to inactivity and non-responsiveness, or the applicants have actually requested withdrawal during the scoring process. So as you can see, we have a total of 235 applicants in-house, and that's about $7.5 billion. Thank you, and now I would like to hand off to Bridget, who will present the small disadvantaged community section of our presentation.
Thanks, Bob. Again, my name is Bridget Chase. I'm from the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. Because my slides are going to be presenting specifics to small community wastewater funding, this first slide that I have is going to go over some definitions that we use in the Clean Water IUP. If you listened to the drinking water presentation earlier this morning, or if you're familiar with the drinking water program, you might notice that the definition for a small community for wastewater projects is less than or equal to 20,000 people, while the drinking water uses a population of less than 10,000 people. A community is considered disadvantaged if their median household income, or MHI, is less than 80% of the statewide MHI, and they're considered severely disadvantaged, or an SDAC, if their MHI is less than 60% of the statewide MHI. Small disadvantaged communities are not included on the fundable list that is in the IUP because we don't require these applications to be ranked or scored to be added to the list. However, due to the current demand on small community wastewater funding and the limited funds available, we have identified priority projects that DFA staff will work on as far as the grant side. If a small DAC would like assistance preparing an application or potentially with some necessary planning work, we have technical assistance available as well. The draft IUP identifies projects that DFA will consider as priority for small community wastewater funding. These priorities include public health projects, projects that address violations of waste discharge requirements or NPDES permits, septic to sewer or regional projects, or other projects that are identified by the regional water boards as priority. We plan to prioritize construction funding and are proposing a maximum of 10% of the available grant and principal forgiveness funds to go towards planning projects. So the majority would go towards construction. This year, we propose increasing the cap per community from 10 million to 12 million for a 5-year period as well. The following table can be found in Appendix E of the draft intended use plan. Small DACs may receive up to 100% planning grant for a project with a maximum grant available of $500,000 per project. If a community receives planning grant or principal forgiveness for their project, the amount dispersed to the community under a planning will be subtracted from the maximum eligible construction grant that is available for that project. So while there's no cap, it goes towards the overall cap. And this table shows available construction grant or principal forgiveness available for small community wastewater projects. Small severely disadvantaged communities may receive up to 100% grant for their project regardless of their wastewater rates. Small DACs must have wastewater rates of at least 1.5% of their median household income to qualify for grant or principal forgiveness and may be eligible for up to 75% grant or PF. Small non-disadvantaged communities may be eligible for up to 50% grant or principal forgiveness if their wastewater rates are at least 4% of their MHI. So they need to be pretty high to qualify for that. Projects may receive up to $30,000 per connection for a maximum of $6 million total. The grant and principal forgiveness caps are higher for septic to sewer or regional projects and allow for up to $75,000 per connection for a maximum of $10 million per project. So I'd like to highlight again that any planning grants or principal forgiveness received for a project counts towards what a community can receive for a construction project. Septic to sewer and regional project funding caps are determined on a per community basis rather than a per project basis. For example, if a project regionalizes or connects 3 distinct communities, it could potentially receive up to 30 million. We also considered smaller projects that will serve a limited amount of residential connections and are proposing to be able to approve grant or principal forgiveness funding up to 2 million regardless of the amount per service connection. This is my last slide that I have to present, but I will be available after the presentation for any questions you have. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Bob. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. So this slide shows some of our complementary funding sources and the SRF funding sources totals. So let's look at our funding levels over the past few years. The total financing shown includes projects subject to scoring, not subject to scoring, and complementary sources. As you can see, 2020 was our highest year, where we funded 53 projects at $662 million. We had significant improvement in execution of agreements during that year as well. We were getting back to our normal levels. If anybody can recall that in 2019, we had rolled out Fiscal implementation, which caused some severe delays in our financing abilities. And then we were stricken with the COVID-19 pandemic that has shifted us to 100% telework during 2020 2020 and part of 2021. We hope to regain our momentum in the remainder of 2021 and reach a new normal for the program. Financial outlook. So the 21-22 Clean Water SRF loan capacity average is set at 600 million for loans. This target is a long-term average. Also, we have available complementary funding is 111 million in the form of grant and principal forgiveness, which is limited to small DACs only. And also I'll note that PF is not available to Green Project Reserve projects. There is also funds available for water recycling projects totaling 45.1 million. Construction grants are limited to 22 million, remaining to be executed. And there is a 5 million cap per project that applies to available construction funds. Grants. There's approximately 20 million is available for water recycling planning studies, and there's a $150,000 cap on those. There is 3 million in water recycling loan funds, but that's expected to be exhausted this year. Loan terms for water recycling loans are basically the same as the Clean Water SRF. And there are also loans available from the Clean Water SRF for water recycling projects as well. The SRF lending capacity. The lending capacity for the program, as I stated, is 600 million this year, which is slightly larger than last year. The lending capacity ensures long-term stability and is a goal determined by staff and our financial advisor. The lending capacity does not affect rollover projects or small disadvantaged community applicants. So what is the fundable list? The fundable list identifies projects DFA expects to finance during the fiscal year. Only projects on the fundable list are eligible to be funded and remain on the list until a funding agreement is executed. Projects may be subject to suspension or removal if determined to be ineligible, inactive, non-responsive, or if the applicant asks to withdraw the project from consideration. Since demand far exceeds the Clean Water SRF's loan capacity, ranking and scoring of projects is warranted. The exception is small disadvantaged community projects and public health projects are automatically included and they do not receive a priority score. The yearly loan capacity target this year is 600 million. Staff are required to target a funding range between 90% and 125% of the 600 million. Therefore, funding levels this year are going to range between 540 million to 750 million dollars. Scoring and ranking of projects. The priority score is comprised of 3 components. The primary score of up to 9 points, which is set by the SRF policy. The secondary score is a score of up to 3 points, and a readiness score is up to 4 points. And both of those are based on applicant-driven tasks. The priority score has a maximum score of 16 points. The cutoff score is determined for all scored projects. The priority score details are shown on the Clean Water SRF comprehensive list as part of the IUP. All projects with similar scores are either in or out based on the funding target range. Developing the fundable list. Staff began scoring projects in January of 2021. The scores are compiled and reviewed by DFA staff and provided to applicants for review and comment. We are currently in the public review process, which is the blue box. Next steps will be to address comments that we received today, then present the proposed IUP, which includes the fundable list, to the State Water Board at the June 15th meeting for adoption. Financing scenarios. 3 financing scenarios were developed. There were no projects that received a priority score of 16 or 15 points. So we'll start off with scenario A. Cutoff score for scenario A is 14 points and includes all projects scoring 14 points. And if you look, we had 6 projects and it came up to $64 million, which is well below the minimum of the range, which was $540 million. Then if we look at scenario B, that had a cutoff score of 13 points and includes all projects scoring 13 points or higher. And again, with the 13 projects, the total was 145 million, which is again below the 90% minimum range. So when we move to scenario C, the cutoff score is 12 points. So in this scenario, all projects scoring 12 points or higher would be eligible. And if you notice that in scenario C, it fits very nicely between the upper and the lower range. It would fund 21 projects totaling 720 million. So this is just a graphical description of what I had just stated. So if you look at both scenarios A and B, they're well below the 90% cutoff on the lower end of our range. And if you look at scenario C, you can see that it would fund 21 projects, and at 720 million, it fits within the range, and it's below the 750 million upper end of the range. Comprehensive list and fundable list housekeeping. So let's talk about that a bit. So staff has identified projects that have not progressed, are inactive, and just not ready to proceed to a funding agreement. The fundable list has 9 projects subject to this removal. The comprehensive list has 17 projects subject to removal. Overall, there's a total of 26 projects with the potential to be removed. Recommended staff recommendations. So staff, DFA management remains concerned about setting unrealistic goals at the beginning of the year. To that end, staff were tasked to develop a fundable list that will accomplish clearing the backlog of rollover projects by the end of the 22 state fiscal year. So staff is recommending scenario C with a cutoff score of 12 points. Scenario C provides 720 million, adds 21 projects, and fits nicely into the funding ranges and does not require the use of partial funding or its implementation. So let's talk about a schedule here. So as I said, the IUP was posted on Thursday, April 22nd. We're holding our workshop today for public outreach and comments. We're going to hold a second meeting on Friday, May 14th. Go over the basic same materials. So you'll have another opportunity there for questions and additional comments. And then we have a deadline to submit comments is Monday, May 24th. And then we'll consider the board, we'll take the item to the board for consideration and adoption on June 15th, which is a Tuesday. Submitting comments, details on the notice of opportunity to comment. The notice was posted, so it's out there. Written comments are due noon, May 24th, 2021. Please use this in your subject line, comment letter dash June 15th, 2021 board meeting dash Clean Water SRF IUP. Both email of less than 15 megabytes is acceptable, and regular mail is also acceptable. You can send that to clerk to the board, Janine Townsend at State Water Resources Control Board on 1001 I Street, 24th floor in Sacramento, California, 95814. You're always welcome to also submit oral comments at our board meeting on June 15th, 2021 via Zoom. Questions can be emailed to the address shown above. And for those on Zoom, please use the raise your hand function or chat function. Thank you for joining us today. This completes my presentation, and we are now available to answer questions. Thank you again. I will now hand it off to Haiti.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Bridget, for your presentations. Now we will transition to taking questions or comments from both Zoom participants and from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund email. As a reminder to folks participating on Zoom, please raise your hand through the reactions icon and use the chat feature if you have a question or comment. You can scroll to the taskbar at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, or you can also type in your comment or question into the chat box. For those who have called in, please press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand, and then I will introduce you when it's your turn, and you can press *6 to unmute yourself. So when I call your name, please provide your first and last name, who you're representing today, and please do your best to keep question or comment to 3 minutes. For folks watching the live webcast, you can email your question or comment to cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov with the subject as 2021-22 IUP workshop. In terms of procedure, I will start with the raised hand. Then we'll look at the chat box. Questions or comment will be taken in the order as they were received, as I mentioned. Okay, so in the event if we are unable to take all of your questions, you can email us at cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov, and staff will respond to those questions after the workshop. I would like to introduce Bob and Bridget, who will be responding to your questions. So we will start with the raised hands. Okay, Abigail Hernandez, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, so when you say that small DACs are automatically added to the funded list, is there a form, or how do we get on that list if the entity were to qualify as a small DAC?
Hi, Abigail. I can respond to that. So the comprehensive list and fundable list, are really SRF requirements, and as was mentioned, the intended use plan is one of the submittals we have to make to EPA. So in order for us to give you funding, you have to appear on certain lists and be available for public comment. So just for clarity, what we're saying is, any small disadvantaged communities can be automatically added to the list when their application is complete. And so we're not going to go back and necessarily, amend the IUP, but we've made that statement up front. What we do is we also are going to be posting quarterly. Well, right now we do post quarterly an application status report, and it shows you where your application is and how complete it is. And at that time, it's also going to say if it has been added to the fundable list, just in an extra column on that report. So there's nothing that you need to do as an applicant specifically, but you can talk to your project manager to make sure that your project does qualify as a small and disadvantaged community, such that we expect they would be automatically added to the fundable list.
Okay, but we would still have to fill out an application, right? And then from there, it'll be determined.
That's right, and we've said that we're officially not going to add you to the fundable list until your application's complete.
Okay.
we basically, our statement is that the fundable list is those projects that are ready to receive an agreement. And so obviously you need a complete application to kind of move to that next step.
Okay. Can you provide the link to the website to obtain the application and the instruction forms, please?
Yes, I think one of us can link that in the chat here momentarily.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Abigail, for your questions. Now we have Malcolm Hamilton. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm from City of Santa Barbara. At the beginning, you mentioned that agreements that are on the fundable list doesn't guarantee a funding agreement. Can you elaborate on what are the pitfalls there, or how do agencies find themselves on the fundable list but not actually getting through the finish line?
Thanks, Malcolm. Great question. I would say when in the past, when projects experience pitfalls, it usually ends up just being a timing issue, and it may take longer to get to an agreement. But at the end of the day, both parties need to be able to sign the agreement. And if there are provisions or terms or legal obstacles that prevent an applicant from being able to sign that agreement, then right, it's not a promise of funding. But being put on the fundable list, right, it's our intention to be working with you, moving you through the application process and the reviews so that we can provide a funding agreement. So that's our intention. If you're on there, we just recognize that there are a lot of federal and state requirements. All the boxes need to be checked. But there's not too many reasons that you wouldn't be able to do it. I'd say the most complicating factor can often be existing debt that agencies have. And if their existing debt documents don't allow additional debt or affordability of more loans, kind of things around that nature.
Okay, and then just quick follow-up. I assume this is on the website, but is there a maybe boilerplate agreement, like if we wanted to get that to our attorneys early, or is that something we have to wait on?
What we do have available is our general terms and conditions, but we don't have a kind of template agreement that you can review. But as soon as I'm done with this sentence, I see Ann Hartridge, who's with our Office of Chief Counsel, that may be able to provide some additional information.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Malcolm. I think one of the things we're looking at doing in the coming months is having available a sample agreement for Clean Water SRF for sort of straightforward deals so that you can see that. We also have posted currently as appendices to the Clean Water SRF policy, there are draft opinions of counsel that are expected to be signed by your general counsel and, in your case, in all likelihood, your bond counsel. And so those are good starting points. But as to your question about what a template agreement may look like, Mike pointed out the general terms and conditions that are posted, which are applicable to all of our funding, regardless if we're talking about Clean Water SRF or safe, affordable drinking water grants or any kind of funding availability that we have. The SRF deals are more complex, and certainly getting a heads up. We agree that that's helpful for your attorneys to get a heads up. What we have done historically is to reach out to your attorneys fairly quickly once your application is complete and getting close to the finish line, to share with them a draft deal document. The one caveat that I want to note for everyone is that Mike talked about time passing, and that it's our hope that that deals get executed within fiscal year. There are things that change based on changes coming to us from US EPA, changes coming to us from various other sources. And so any draft template that we may end up posting is going to be absolutely subject to those changes. For example, we have a link to our Davis-Bacon expectations, and that link changes every year based on what we get from US EPA. But as far as our standard financial conditions, in addition to I mentioned an appendix to the Clean Water SRF policy related to opinions. We've also got an appendix to the Clean Water SRF policy related to standard financial expectations. And I'm not sure if the latest update has been posted, but it's also a good place for your CFO and your attorney to take a look and see what our assumptions are. Because as Mike mentioned, sometimes we run into issues with existing debt and assumptions that exist within that existing debt that may not match up with the assumptions that we have for our deals. And I know that was a really long in the weeds answer, but I think that for entities who do have existing bond debt, these are the kinds of questions that come up quite a bit. And so I wanted to try to give a complete answer.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really helpful. And then I just really quickly on two others. So if we have a score of 13, it appears that the review to get that score is kind of cursory, but are we to expect a more rigorous deep dive into the application components once we get on the fundable list? Right.
That's exactly right. So we did our kind of cursory review to see if it was complete enough for us to really dive in more deeply. And when and if the board adopts it in June, then that's our orders to go ahead and move forward with those applications.
Okay. And then finally, is there anything that precludes an agency from having two applications funded in the same year, or more than one, essentially?
Nope. And I will add one more thing, just because thanks for asking, Malcolm. That one other thing to be aware of as far as things that could prevent you from getting to an executed agreement. I think Bob mentioned something that's the same as previous years is that you can start construction prior to having an executed funding agreement with us. And if you issued that notice to proceed for the contractor to start, we're going to use that date as your eligible start date. However, the big warning we would give is that, one, you don't have a funding agreement yet, and two, you really should not start construction before our environmental review is complete, because if you've started construction and we haven't done our federal consultations with other federal agencies, that could disqualify you from the SRF fund. So that's kind of one of the other big things to time up. But you can work with us to make sure the environmental review is complete before you go out to bid and break ground. I see Christopher with his video off.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one comment to what Mike was saying there about projects that are being added to the fundable list, those that are scored 13 or higher this year. So we have already, his staff, his project managers have already started coordinating with the environmental staff to start reviewing some of those projects. So even, and it's not official until the board approves the IUP, but this is one of the benefits that we were anticipating from the new scoring system, is that would then allow our staff to be able to score those projects and have a better idea of which projects are going to be added to the fundable list. We're certainly hopeful that the board will approve the list as we've recommended, but nonetheless, so they're already coordinating with the environmental review staff and starting the reviews and lining those projects up for review even before the list is approved.
Great, thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Mike and Anne, for your responses, and Malcolm, thank you for your questions. I see now that I don't see any more raised hands, so now I'm gonna move on to the chat box, and we do have several questions there. So we have a question from Lee Camerich. Can you provide an update on fiscal and its impacts on Clean Water State Revolving Fund?
Well, I suppose I ought to try to field that. So Fiscal is obviously a big system. It's a statewide system. It isn't just the State Water Board. It's all state agencies. It's been going on for a number of years, and I don't know. I'm not intimately involved with that on a daily basis. I don't know exactly what the wrap up is. What I would say at this point is that as far as the impacts from the transition work, the transition work has been done. We are using Fiscal on a daily basis. I would not say that there's no impact from it still. There are still impacts from Fiscal, but I would say that we're on the tail end of that. And as Bob, I think, indicated during the presentation, we're hoping to say that whatever new normal is, that we'll be able to say that during this coming fiscal year. But there is, as I say, nonetheless, there are impacts from Fiscal to the way we do things. There are more entries, more data entries, and more steps that we have to go through. They did not purchase the loan module as part of Fiscal, so we're sort of doing a workaround there. It's really a procurement-based system, so it's not ideal from our standpoint. But as I say, it's a statewide system. Perhaps in the future they will purchase the loan module for that and make our lives a little easier. But nonetheless, we have learned a lot and about the system, and we are doing everything we can to make it work as best we can.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Leigh, for your question. Our next question in the chat box from Bobby Larson, pardon me. Are the projects shown in red font in Appendix B the rollover projects? If not, what is the significance of the red text? Thanks.
Well, I can take that. The red font indicates projects that are rolling over from previous years that were also identified to receive partial funding for their application. So those projects were all very large, and we had set them as there's a certain cap to the amount of funding that they can receive, and those are identified in red just so that we can keep track of them closer. But the good news is this year we're not going to have it. There's no more else to add, so we didn't have to implement that.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Bobby, for your question. Our next question comes from Abigail Hernandez. What are the current interest rate on Clean Water State Revolving Fund loans? Are they the same as the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund?
This is Mike. It is unfortunately not the same as drinking water, and it's a little bit more complicated. So the Clean Water interest rate adjusts every time the state of California does a general obligation bond sale, and it's always half of the bond sale interest rate. So it is currently 1.1%, but it actually changed, I want to say, 2 or 3 times here in the last couple months, back and forth as the state was selling bonds. So, there's not really a guarantee of how long it'll be set at 1.1%. Typically, we see bond sales in the spring and in the fall, and we do track the interest rate changes, and you can see that on our website of when it changes. Don't know if that'll give you any confidence in what to expect, but we do typically see the interest rate not change by 0.2 of a percent or less. There's usually not huge jumps and swings, but that's as much as I can say to that.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Abigail, for your question. Next, we have Kristen Burt in the chat box. Your question is, what factors are used to determine if a project gets partial funding?
So in the past years, what we did is we're trying to create a fundable list that is within our sustainable target funding range. And Bob talked about that our sustainable funding target for this year is $600 million. And it's not just for this year, that is using our financial model, that's projecting that that's a sustainable target, for the next 20 years. That number could change year to year as we toggle with the model, but we don't expect it to change drastically. So that's really what we're aiming to do, and kind of looking at the scenarios based on the board approved policy. What we're tasked to do is score and rank the applications, and based on their cutoff score, see if we can afford essentially to add those projects to the fundable list. So in the past, what we've done is, instead of adding a single project asking for $1 billion to our fundable list, we've said that we would offer partial financing so that we could fund more projects and get more water quality benefits for the state. There hasn't been a clear-cut calculation, and it's not that every time we're going to allow 30% of your costs. I think it's a little bit been to what crop of applications you were with during that given year. So like Bob said, just by chance, there weren't any huge dollar requests on the applications this year. So we were able to say that we can fully fund the projects with a score of 12 or higher. Can't necessarily guarantee that will be the case next year. If a large project comes in asking for $1 billion, I would guess that we would most likely say we're going to offer partial funding so that we can extend our financing to more communities.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Kristen, for your question. We have one more question in the chat box, and then we'll move on to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund email. So Cheryl Fowler is asking, does the interest rate fluctuate during the term of the State Revolving Fund loan?
Cheryl, I'm thinking you're asking that, once you have a funding agreement, does that interest rate change? And the answer is no. So once we begin drafting the agreement, at that point, we will lock in the interest rate as we start writing it in and encumbering the funds for the project. And that will be the interest rate for the life of the loan, typically a 30-year loan. And so projects that are paying off, still making repayments on their loans, have those interest rates that were encumbered to the project back at that time.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Cheryl, for your question. Now we'll go ahead and move on to the Clean Water SRF email. We do have a question from Kristen Burton. Kristen, I know that you're on the Zoom platform. Would you like me to go ahead and read off your question, or would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, I'll go ahead and read it. Thank you, Kristen. So can agencies use state revolving fund as match for WIFIA funding, even though California was selected to receive WIFIA funding for its state revolving fund program?
I may ask for Christopher's help a little bit on this one, but the question is around WIFIA funding and the fact that WIFIA offers to finance 49% of the project's estimated costs, and California we are working on preliminary stages of putting together an application for SWFIA, which is state WIFIA funding. And so if WIFIA is funding 49%, can California fund California's SRF fund the other 51% with SWFIA funds? I think that's probably the question. Christopher, do you have a strong sense of the answer?
Yeah, let me add a couple of things to that. So let me start by saying, yes, we have lots of applications, folks that have received WIFIA, San Diego, San Francisco, there's a couple of others there that I just can't recall off the top of my head. So yes, we're planning on providing funding to them from the SRF program for that 51% that Mike referred to. One of the things we have to be mindful of is that any project cannot receive more than 80% federal funds. So we're going to have to manage our sources of funds that we provide and use repayment funds or bond funds, something other than federal funds. The other thing I'll add to this is, so California, as Mike says, California has been invited to submit an application for SWFIA. That has not been submitted at this point. It is still a work in progress. It is somewhat of an open question. At the beginning, I made reference to the American Rescue Plan. And so if we did receive some funds from that, that might allow us to delay or put the SWFIA application on the shelf until a future year. So that remains an open question, but don't let the fact that you might have been either you applied for WIFIA or you've received a WIFIA application, don't let that stop you from submitting an application to SRF. Just make sure that we're aware of that. I mean, WIFIA is required to let us know every time that they get an application that might be eligible for the SRF. So we probably already know, but make sure that we're aware of that. And we have a pretty good relationship with the WIFIA folks. We have a regular call with them and discuss projects that we're mutually funding. So don't let it be an impediment to submitting an application to SRF.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Mike, for your responses. And Kristen, thank you for your question. Now we have another question from our email. It's from Andrea Lout, and the question is, if a project in Appendix B was marked yes in the column proposed equivalency and FFATA projects, what does that mean? Will there be principal forgiveness amount yet to be determined?
Well, I can take that one, Mike, if you want.
Go ahead.
So one of our requirements of the list for EPA's purposes is to identify projects that we intend to use as our equivalency projects. So it's just an exercise where we identify projects that are a large enough dollar value. We have to report enough projects that equal to the amount of our capitalization grant each year. It really has nothing to do with the applicant. It doesn't neither help you or hurt you. It's just something that I have to keep track of so that I can do the proper reporting. I report to a system called PFATA, those projects that also meet the equivalency requirements. And EPA likes us to let them know who we think we might do that with. And so on the list, there's a column that just has a yes, I think, in it. So basically, we identified projects that were over a certain dollar amount that is potentially would be the ones that we would use to meet our equivalency requirement as a program.
And if we pick you, there's not really a benefit and there's not really any penalty or anything extra you have to do. It's all the same requirements that you're already adhering to.
Great, thanks, Mike, and thank you, Bob. Andrea, thank you for your question. We have a couple more questions from our email box, and so for those who are raising their hands, we'll come back to you after our email. So our next question comes from Hannah Dodd. How do you determine which projects you are being removed from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund fundable list?
I can take this one. So hopefully it's not a huge surprise to any of the projects listed as being removed. The fundable list is, the intention is that we will execute an agreement by the end of the fiscal year. And those projects on the list we just don't believe that it'll be possible to get to an executed agreement. And so it could be, it's mostly on the applicant side and not on our side. So there's something that's holding up the project. There may be an outstanding legal issue they're waiting for. It may have been determined that they cannot afford the loan that they need, and they're waiting a few years to raise their rates. Something that is preventing us from moving forward with it. And so at this time, we'll have all the project information in our database. We're going to mark it as inactive, and it can be reactivated. At any time. We'll score it at the end of the calendar year, like all the other projects, to see if it's ready now to be moving forward. And part of that is trying to keep a realistic fundable list. It is our goal to make great progress on this list and really try to get these projects executed in this fiscal year.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Hannah, for your question. Next, we have Susan Robinson. Would wastewater treatment upgrades for a system owned by a mutual water company be eligible for Clean Water State Revolving Fund funds?
Unmuting myself slowly to see if anyone, I know on the drinking water SRF program, mutual water companies are an eligible applicant. And Christopher, looks like you might have some thoughts on that.
Yes, so I don't think that that's going to be possible there. And the reason I hesitate on that is, so the main eligibility here is publicly owned treatment works. That's a long-standing, that's from the very beginning of the program, and that's mostly what we fund. We can fund other categories, and so I'm looking quickly over the other eligibilities, and there were some eligibilities added in 2014, and give me 1 second here, but I don't think there's going to be a way to do that. Probably what I would recommend to you is that you contact Mike later on, and we take a closer look at that just to verify that. I don't want to give you too quick an answer to that, but I also don't want you to be disappointed if we have to tell you that that's not going to be possible for the Clean Water SRF. As Mike indicated, drinking water SRF, that's certainly done, but on the Clean Water SRF side, the rules are a little bit different.
And that's not an eligibility that we can change by redefining who's eligible in the intended use plan. That's an eligibility coming from EPA, well established.
Yes, correct.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Christopher. Susan, we appreciate your question. Now we have another question from Mark Stevens from the City of San Diego, Transportation and Stormwater Department. Could you please address provisions involving the sewer overflow and stormwater municipal grants program from US EPA?
Well, I'll do my best here, and that's a developing story there. Obviously, you've taken a look at the Clean Water SRF, and you see that we have some description in there, but it's not totally clear to me how that's going to work. We've put in there as best we can what the process is going to be and what the availability will be. I can say, and I think it's in the IUP, that there has been some money appropriated for that. And if you do the math, it winds up being a little over $7 million for California. I think that's from federal fiscal year 20 and 21. The program was reauthorized a few years ago. Well, it was authorized, and then the way the federal budget works is a program is authorized, and then Congress can appropriate money. So there's a two-step process there. So at this point, the only money that we know of is $7 million. Whether there's additional funds appropriated in the future, that remains to be seen. So that $7 million, what the plan is, and I think this is laid out in the IUP, hopefully I'm just repeating what's already there. The plan is that, of course, they did their most recent solicitation. I don't remember the numbers there, but the list of applications exceeded what they had available. So the plan is to go to the projects that were next, on the just below the cutoff line, whatever that was, for the stormwater grant solicitation that was done a while back. And they would go to those projects and say, okay, we can offer you some additional funds, these funds that are coming to us through EPA. And there was a prioritization scheme in there, disadvantaged communities and some other criteria that they would use, and try to put that money to use. If there is additional funds that are appropriated in the future, then I think the plan was to have another solicitation and try to open that up a little bit more. But again, at this point, it's not clear to me whether any additional funds will be appropriated, and if so, how much would be appropriated. So it's something that you definitely should be. I'm sure that there's an email distribution list for the stormwater program. I would highly recommend that you get on that list, put your name in for that, and keep an eye on the stormwater website on our water board website. So that's the best information I have at this point, which I apologize that's not more clear than that.
Thank you, Christopher, for your response. And Mark, thank you for your question. We have another email coming from Steve Peters from Valley Water. The federal requirements include, under equal employment opportunity mentions, national policies that include requiring federal contracting agencies to include, among others, affirmative action provisions. Being that California voters have continued to reject bringing back affirmative action, has this been an issue on approving California SRF loans?
You want to take a stab at that, Ann?
Sure, I'm happy to chime in. So the affirmative steps are a little bit different than what the California voters have barred. So the federal requirements have not stopped us from making our loans.
So I would just add to that there is as part of the process, there is a DVBE requirement, a good faith effort that one has to go through if they do receive SRF funding. But the requirement is to go through the good faith effort. Well, there are no goals, there are no requirements, there are no minimums, maximums. It's just you go through the process and you make sure that those disadvantaged and veterans business enterprises are made aware of their opportunity to participate in the SRF financing that we're doing.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Anne, for your response. Steve, thank you for your question. It looks like we might have one more question from our email. Give me a second. Oh, actually, we don't. So now we're going to come back to our raised hands. And so, Abigail, thank you so much for your patience. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Actually, I think I found the answer to my question. So I just wanted to know if, what forms I needed to submit for the initial application. So I think I found this on the website that was sent on the chat. But so if the entity wanted to do the design first, we can submit two separate applications, right? One for the design and then one for the construction. They don't have to be done at the same time.
Great question. I'll have one of our presenters respond to your question.
Yes, that is true. I will add that we are definitely executing planning and design funding agreements for small disadvantaged communities. For large systems that aren't qualifying for grant and just loans, you can submit a planning and design application, but just by the nature of the scoring process, they tend to score much lower, just being that they're not ready for construction, which is part of the scoring process. And those planning and design costs are eligible as part of a construction application. So, if you're a community that needs the planning and design funds to even complete a construction application and move to that step, then yes, please submit that application. But otherwise, if you are able to kind of float those costs, then all of those are eligible under one construction funding agreement.
Okay, and what's the turnaround of the application? Is it similar to the drinking water process, or is it?
It should be similar, and I got some nudges that maybe I was being a little bit too optimistic with my turnaround times on from a complete application to an executed funding agreement. We are, as you may have heard, we are constantly trying to streamline and expedite and adapt. And of course, our COVID-19 time has made that extra challenging. But yes, if you're on the fundable list, or if you're an automatically fundable project, a small disadvantaged community, then from having a complete application, because we can't do much until we have a complete application. From that time until an executed agreement, maybe 9 months is a better estimate. But it kind of they're each a little bit specific to the challenges that arise with that community.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Mike, I just wanted to add, as far as I know, Abigail's question was in regards to design. So if the planning work is done, for example, the environmental, the engineering report, and all that's needed is the design, we could go straight into a construction agreement without the design being done. And you could complete the design work under a construction agreement.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Bridget, and thank you, Mike. And Abigail, thank you for your question. So that actually wraps up our question and answer session. So I want to thank you all who asked questions and submitted your comments. I know we have a limited amount of time today, so if we were unable to get to you, please email us at cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. I'd like to thank everyone for your attention this afternoon. So as we approach the close of our workshop, we want to recap some next steps. So written comments, you can submit your written comments on the Clean Water SRF intended use plan, and those are due on May 24th at noon. Please email to commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line comment letter -June 15, 2021 board meeting -CWSRF IUP. And for written comments for the drinking water SRF intended use plan, those are due on June 1st at noon. And please send an email to commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov using the subject line comment letter -June 15, 2021 board meeting DWSRF IUP. You can also mail your comment letter to Janine Townsend, clerk to the board at State Water Resources Control Board, 1001 I Street, 24th floor, Sacramento, California, 95814. Both intended use plans will be agenda items at the June 15, 2021 2021 board meeting. Board meetings are held via Zoom. If you would like to provide oral comments, please visit the State Water Board's remote meeting page for more information. The public comment process of board meetings is very similar to the process we use today. The Division of Financial Assistance will be holding a second workshop covering the same material on Friday, May 14th. An official notice will be sent out shortly. The purpose of the second workshop is to provide additional time for the public to review the posted intended use plans and bring any questions or comments that you may have. So before we end the workshop, we would like to hear your thoughts on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan presentation. If you could just indulge us for just a minute more to complete this quick poll. We have 4 quick poll questions that will help us know how we did today with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan. We appreciate your participation, and we want to assure you that all responses to the poll questions will be anonymous. With that, Beth, if you can launch a first poll question. Great, thank you, Beth. So first question, how clear and easy was the information presented today? Very clear and easy to follow, clear and easy to follow, somewhat clear and easy to follow, not clear and easy to follow, or no opinion or comment. Okay, great. Thank you for your response. I will go ahead. Oh, it looks like folks are still voting. Okay, I'll give it a couple more seconds. All right. Great, thank you. So now we'll move on to the second poll question. The second poll question, how satisfied were you with the ability to ask questions or provide comments? Very satisfied, satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not satisfied, no opinion or comment. I'll give folks a few more seconds. Okay, great, thank you. Now we'll move on to poll number 3. And how satisfied were you with the responses to the questions or comments? Very satisfied, satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not satisfied, and you don't have an opinion or no comment. Great, thank you. Last one. Thank you, everyone. So our last question, for future workshops, I would prefer to participate via Zoom, in person, both via Zoom and in person, or no opinion or comment. Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Beth, thank you for launching those polls, and everyone, thank you for participating in our poll questions, and we appreciate your feedback. So now, as we close the workshop for today, I want to thank the Division of Financial Assistance and Office of Public Participation for their work in putting this workshop together. I also want to take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact us at cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan, or drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan. Okay, we will adjourn, so that gives you a couple minutes to your day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we appreciate your participation and feedback. Have a good rest of your day.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate your time today. And thank you to the staff. Nice job.
Drinking Water SRF IUP is posted. Enjoy.